Hi, this is Pod Save the UK.
I'm Nish Kumar.
And I'm Coco Khan.
It's week one of the campaign and the Tories have declared generational warfare.
We're joined by political correspondent Liz Bates to find out if there are votes to be won in wedge politics.
And we speak to Christine Jardine from the Liberal Democrats about the differences between them and the Labour Party and Battleground Scotland. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. We are joined once again with it says here, heady aroma of Sky News' political correspondent, Liz Bates. Welcome, Liz.
At this point, this is just kind of bullying, isn't it?
Yeah. It's quite a lot of pressure for you as well.
It is.
Like when you walk into rooms now, do you have to think about how you smell?
I've started showering much more regularly.
Oh no, this is now bullying.
For anyone who hasn't listened to last Wednesday's episode, it was the first time that we'd all been in the studio, though Liz has been a frequent guest on the show. And Coco said it was nice to both see and smell her, which is one of the strangest opening conversational gambits.
Anyway, I've been in talks with your HR department, so let's just leave it at
that. Liz, you covered a few elections.
I sure have.
Is there one that has started this badly? Specifically for the party and government?
That's a good question. I mean, they've all been so different because I suppose the last one was 2019. I mean, 2019 it certainly had a kind of shambolic feel to it because it involved, Boris Johnson. And so
he locked himself in a fridge.
He locked himself in a fridge. He was always like running away from journalists. And
he stole a guy's phone for a bit.
He did. He did. Lovely Joe Pye. So that certainly had a very chaotic feel to it.
But this is different. 1 week.
This is 1 week. And the thing about this one is it has a kind of there are some different feelings going on. It's like it's like really boring and really bad at the same time. Rishi and Starmer, although they are different politically, they have that kind of, they sort of dress like centrist dads. They're quite disciplined. They're not these kind of eccentric characters that we've had before. So there's, I think there's a few different feels to it, but it could go down as a potentially, I think, quite a boring.
Well, for any of our listeners that may have missed some of aforementioned gaffes, the election kicked off with Rishi Sunak drowned in the rain. Yeah. The drowned rat look, as it's known. Then there was the incident where he was placing Tory councillors in press junkets and press moments, he was caught out quite quickly. But there was also Ed Davey falling into a lake, let's not forget. So, it's been a very gaff-full election so far. One thing I did want to ask you, Liz, didn't Boris Johnson famously say gaffes were good? Is this all a tactic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always about leaning into who you are. That's what Boris Johnson was very good at. He knew that people loved that side of his personality, that they loved the idea of a politician that wasn't always perfect. And I think he once said, if you can have enough scandals, if you can have like 3 or 4 or 5 scandals going on at once, then, people just don't know where to look. So that was kind of his thing. I'm not sure it's working for Rishi.
No, I mean, one of the key gaffes he made this week was him trying to muck in with locals at a brewery in South Wales and asking a very specifically stupid question.
Is he looking forward to all the football?
Not so much my bag. But
well, you get people in.
No, but that's because you guys aren't in it.
Well, get people out, there'll be people coming, it'll be good summer
of support England at least.
That was a clip from BBC News where Rishi Sunak asked Welsh workers if they were looking forward to the Euros in the summer, forgetting that the national team in Wales didn't qualify for said competition. It's been he's not had a great start. There's all this data that he's 20 points behind. Some Conservative pollsters have suggested that gap has been exaggerated, and there are people that have suggested that gap could be shortened by the people who currently say that they don't know how they're going to vote. But him closing that gap is exclusively predicated on him running an at least competent campaign.
Yeah. And I think one of the things about going into an election campaign is this isn't the bit where you really set out who you are and every single policy that your party is about. You can't establish everything. And this is just the window dressing bit. So it really is about those moments on camera. And so you have to try and get those right. But I think he's in a position now where he's gone into it because of the polls, because of the issues that have gone on with his party, just he's lacking a bit of confidence. And so every single thing suddenly feels like an opportunity for a gaffe. And he is taking those opportunities when they come up. Even that moment, it hurt me. Even why does he say all the football like that? Just say the football. It's like he's an alien that's read a book about how to socialise.
There has been some announcements, though. It's not all windows dressing. I mean, let's talk about how Rishi Sunak has announced, and I can't believe I'm even saying this, a reintroduction of national service as their first major piece of policy for the campaign. The proposal essentially asks that all 18-year-olds choose between two options of national service. One is spending a year in the armed forces, potentially going on to military careers. The other pathway, which most 18-year-olds would be expected to take, is 1 weekend a month, volunteering for a total of 25 days. This volunteering might be with the police, the fire service, the NHS or other charity organisations. And crucially, the voluntary work would not be paid. The military service element would be. Home Secretary James Cleverly appeared on the BBC earlier this week, giving one questionable explanation for this policy.
It's about addressing the fragmentation that we've seen in society. Too many young people living in their own bubble, whether it be a digital bubble or a social bubble. And we want to get back to the situation where people are mixing with young people from different areas, different economic groups, different religions.
So there's a lot to talk about with this policy. The key question is, who is it for, and would anybody really benefit? Because, I mean, if you look at the situation that the 18-year-olds in question are facing, this is already a generation battling a cost of living crisis, being priced out of homes. And this policy also comes in stark contrast to Labour's messaging around young people in recent weeks, where they've said that they're considering plans to enable 16-year-olds to vote. Liz, what do you make of this as a kind of first policy announcement from the Conservatives?
One of the things that annoys me so much in politics is announcements of things that are not the thing that they're called.
Yes.
I really want this message to go out from this podcast to everybody in the world. This is not national service. Yeah. National service, when you say it, everybody thinks of you joining the military for like a year as an 18-year-old. Yeah. It's basically conscription. This should be called the government's 25-day volunteer scheme.
Yeah.
Because most of the kids that are doing it will not be doing it as part of the military. They're just doing one weekend a month for 12 months. And I have a problem even with that. So the framing around it is purely political. It's purely for the election. Yeah. It's purely so that, grumpy old people can hear it and say, well, yes, bloody hell, well, that'll help those kids that are standing around on the corner there smoking weed. Well, it won't. It will only help them for one weekend. Yeah. Of a year when they're 18 years old, and those kids are not going to do it anyway.
There's a few things I just want to talk about in specific regards to this policy. Firstly, this idea that, you need to break people out of their social bubbles. I think that digitally that's certainly something that we're all cognizant of. But in terms of people's actual social bubbles, you can't force people to be friends with other people. And also, a party that has been very recently run by members of the Bullingdon Club, lecturing people about needing to break out of their bubble, whose current leader and Prime Minister has been filmed as a young person saying he didn't have any working class friends, is going to struggle to sell this message that people need to break down their barriers. Secondly, this policy has not been costed at all, as far as I can tell. And also, when asked about whether it would be enforced, James Cleverly seemed to suggest that it wouldn't be mandatory. But then later on, there was a policy announcement that suggested if you didn't do the national service, you wouldn't be eligible for public sector jobs. So they haven't even worked out the parameters of how this is going to be enforced and what, if any, punishments are going to take place. And thirdly, when you're talking about this specific generation of children, yes, we all find them very annoying, because we all find young people annoying because we're jealous of their youth, because they're statistically further away from death than the rest of us. But also bear in mind, this specific generation of teenagers did commit quite a public act of generational national service when they put their lives on hold for 2 years in order to protect older people. So this generation being lectured by politicians like James Cleverly and Rishi Sunak are going to, I imagine, take it very, very poorly, because it reeks of hypocrisy and doesn't acknowledge the sacrifice that they have already made.
So do you like it or not?
But I mean, like, no, you do raise like loads of really interesting points. Like, how does it serve young people who are already suffered enough? Even just in terms of like money. I was thinking the other day, I got the education maintenance allowance when I was in sixth form. Like, that was money in my pocket to go and spend and enhance my life. They don't have that.
Yeah.
Even if they decide to go to university, they don't have maintenance grants. They don't even have Saturday jobs. This is the story that lives rent-free in my mind. Did you have a Saturday job, Liz?
Yes.
Yes. Who didn't? Mine was in Debenhams, legend. But apparently now the number of young people in Saturday jobs has completely fallen through the floor. We're looking at something like 40% or something like that. So actually opportunities for young people to commune with each other. Sports funding's cut, arts and culture funding's cut. I'm not against the idea of some sort of community thing. But listening to you speak, Nish, it really did remind me of, did your mum ever make you be friends with other people?
Yes, but they were all Indian.
Yeah, well, obviously, of course, it's a given. But you know, that sort of idea of like, the philosophical point I'm trying to make is, aren't the Conservatives meant to be anti-nanny state? And this is the most Asian parent behaviour I have maybe ever seen. Go and be friends. Go and be friends. Be friends. Maybe you could marry. Maybe you could have some values that are just like, you know what I mean? I'm just like, oh, stop it, Uncle Rishi, stop. But listen, I also think there's a really important question of the well-being of 18-year-olds. Some of the reasons this is being pitched is because, as we know, mental health amongst our youth is very poor. Access to child mental health services also very poor. And we got a fascinating voice note in from one of our listeners, Emily Davis. So she's got particular concerns about this, and she is a military wife.
Hi, Nish and Coco. The Tories have once again proved that they seemingly don't want to win this election with the introduction of their new national service policy. Whilst they are offering out volunteering for 18-year-olds, it is for underfunded services such as the police, NHS and fire services, all of which have been underfunded by the Tory government over the past 14 years. Similarly, the armed forces have been stripped back non-stop since the Tories came to power in 2010. As a military wife, I can see the mental health effects could be awful for the 18-year-olds who haven't signed up for this lifestyle on their own. You really have to want to be there.
So I think there's some really important points there. And I would also just like to say, just in case any of our listeners sometimes don't find themselves interested in this because of maybe negative feelings towards the military, like I hear all of that. But at the end of the day, people join up for all sorts of reasons. Lots of working class kids sign up for all sorts of reasons. And I think it's fair to say that we want everyone treated as workers fairly, right? So what Emily said there were her words. You really have to want to be there. And I think that really stuck with me, because according to a government survey of attitudes within the armed forces, 6 in 10 of them rate their morale as low. So to what extent this scheme would even help our young people remains to be seen. And the satisfaction levels around the basic pay is at 32%. It's lowest record this year. When it comes to welfare support, only 4 in 10 personnel feel that they are satisfied with what they receive. Does this have signs of a policy that, you know, just hasn't been thought out? What is it designed to do?
Is it
in
just
terms
designed
of the
to make
electorate?
us angry? And is that basically what it is?
It is kind of designed. It's designed to make you guys angry. It's designed to make classic kind of Tory voters that are maybe thinking, all right, it's time to give somebody else a try. Keir Starmer seems like pretty reasonable. I'll give him a go. It's time to make those people think, actually, no, I really like this idea of national service. Our kids need to be kind of kicked into shape. You know, I'll go back to my original point, which is they've basically decided we want to announce national service. So they've done that, and then they've worked backwards from it. It's a policy that is in no way national service. It's a little bit of volunteering. It should be called a little bit of volunteering.
And I think that's like Lou Vegas on the song, a little bit of volunteering in my
yeah. And who could really be against that? I think it would be a lot less controversial. It wouldn't have had the political effect they want it to have, which is that it, you know, kind of divides the country along lines that will, they think, help them in the general election.
And I think it's worth saying there is another layer to this Conservative intergenerational warfare arsenal when it comes to the second major piece of policy that they announced this week. It's the state pension triple lock plus. To give you a quick refresher, the triple lock, which both major parties have committed to keeping, refers to the way that the state pension is indexed each year to keep pace with inflation. It's indexed based on the rate rate of inflation, the rate of earnings, or 2.5%, whichever is highest. The plus of the triple lock plus refers to the threshold at which pensioners start paying tax. So under this proposal, that threshold would increase each year. The triple lock is designed to make sure pensioners who only receive the state pension don't fall into poverty. But this, like many Tory policies, will disproportionately advantage already wealthy people. What do you think, Liz? Vote winner?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, kind of obviously,
and that's
right?
the end of that conversation, everybody. Liz Bates has spoken.
I think what's quite clearly happened is that the Conservatives have decided where can we kind of grab back our votes. You know, their core vote tends to be older, and clearly they've come up with a couple of policies, this and national service, which they think is going to appeal to that group of voters. I do wonder if he did go on Loose Women and get confronted by Janet Street Porter, who said, "Why do you hate pensioners?" And I wonder if at that moment he thought, okay. I have decided what my election strategy is. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a vote winner. There was a poll that came out yesterday. You talked about the polls narrowing, and I think one of the polls that had narrowed and given and put the difference between Labour and the Conservatives at about 12 points, which is very much on the low end for the Labour Party, showed that shift back towards the Conservatives was among, I think, people over 60 or over 65, something like that. So clearly some of those policies are landing. And if you promise to give people more money, they're probably going to vote for you.
And the thing is, I don't think any of us, you know, here today in this studio or our listeners would object to the idea that pensioners who are in poverty should be lifted out of it. It's horrible to hear, you know, recently, particularly with the hikes in energy, about pensioners not being able to heat their homes. I mean, that is brutal stuff. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, but it's just the fact that those who are asset rich also receive this little bit of buoyancy, and that sort of tells you who matters and who doesn't. I think that's why it grates on me a little bit, I think.
Now, quick update on the policy announcement that Labour have made this week.
Oh, we're doing a clip.
No, we're not doing a clip.
Not
It
doing
was
a clip.
supposed to be a jovial reference to the lack of Labour policy announcements.
Oh, right. Sorry, I
There's
missed
not
that.
been a huge amount of policy announcements from the Labour Party. They've said that what they won't do is introduce new tax rises, and there won't be an emergency budget as soon as they come into office. But we've not seen a huge amount of detail. Do you think this is Labour biding their time a little bit?
There's been so much in terms of setting out from the Labour Party how they want to run the country, and you quite often get this kind of narrative which is like, oh, you know, Labour doesn't have any policies. The thing about the Labour Party is it doesn't have any memorable policies. Like, you can't just recall something apart from, you know, there's things like Great British Energy and stuff like that, but they've been setting out these kind of missions that are, and I know because I've covered them, are in vast amounts of detail. So they have this like whole programme for government. What they kind of need to do now in the general election is, as we said before, it's about moments and, you know, how people kind of respond to the image of Keir Starmer and people around him, Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner. But they do need something that can kind of encapsulate what they're about. You know, maybe there's something a bit more interesting coming down the line, but given their track record, I think also maybe not.
Now, with the election campaign kicking into full gear, we have some exciting news.
That's right. We're still going to be dropping into your feeds on Thursdays, but for the next few weeks, we're going to be there first thing in the morning, and we'll have more news in the weeks to come.
A huge thank you for all of the suggestions and comments we've had so far. If you have a topic you want us to explore, drop us a line on psuk@reducelistening.co.uk.
Joining us now is Liberal Democrat Christine Jardine, MP for Edinburgh West in Scotland. Welcome, Christine.
Hello. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I know it's been a very busy week for the Lib Dems. You've unveiled your new battle bus, and we've seen that Ed Davey's hitting the road, or let's be honest, hitting the water. We're really keen to understand just what the Lib Dems stand for in this election. So what's the message you're trying to get out to voters?
What we want to get out is that in so many parts of the country, if you want a change of government, you want a change of direction for the country, the Liberal Democrats are the people to vote for to guarantee that, because we're second to the Tories in something like 80 seats in the south of England, and we have seats in Scotland, and we're challenging the SNP here. We're also challenging Labour in a few places in the UK. So if you want an MP who will work for your constituency, and a party who will focus on the NHS, on education, on fixing the crippling mess that the economy's in, then vote for us.
In terms of the NHS policy, the Labour Party and the Tories have pledged to reduce NHS waiting lists. How would you say the Lib Dems policy is different or distinct from those?
Well, we specifically want to employ 8,000 more GPs. Now, that's going to cost £1 billion a year. But we would also make some changes to the contract and the pension contract, because one of the things that a lot of GPs have come to me with over the past few years is that at the moment they are disincentivised from staying on past a certain age because the pensions on the penalties in the pension, are so huge that it's expensive, it's not worth the while. So we would change that to enable them to stay longer.
I think the question is, though, is exactly how does your policy differ from Labour's? I know you've mentioned the 8,000 GPs there. Labour aren't necessarily going into the exact numbers of GPs, but they are also talking about changing some elements of the contract. They're also talking about, use of the private sector. Where is the difference? Where's the point of difference?
Well, I think the point of difference is that we are specifically talking about the GPs. We're also concerned about the state of buildings. A lot of buildings across the UK, the government have just left to decline and they're crumbling and people are having to work in horrible conditions. The other thing we want to do is make it possible for us all to be guaranteed to see a GP within a week because we address those shortages. That, if you like, is the point of difference. That's what we want to address.
Now, Christine, you're a Scottish MP and the Tories and Labour have a serious eye on picking up or defending seats that have, basically there's been wobbles about the SNP, right? So given that, I actually want to put a question to you from one of our listeners. So this is Michael Bibby. Michael used to be a card-carrying member of the Labour Party and is wondering where he should go next. He asks, given Ed Davies' stated aim to replace the SNP as the third party in Westminster, exactly how much of a voice would that leave for the people of Scotland within the UK Parliament? Let's face it, a vote for the Lib Dems in Scotland is just that, a vote for the Lib Dems. They're a UK party. So how can you convince Scots that they would genuinely act as their voice in Parliament if they vote for them?
Well, Michael's completely wrong, because a vote for the Lib Dems in Scotland is a vote for the Scottish Liberal Democrats. We are a federal organisation, unlike the Labour Party, so we do have a great deal of autonomy. You don't have to be a member of the SNP to represent Scotland. And as for Labour, well, they're so centralised. Yes, they have Scottish MPs. Hopefully they'll have more Scottish MPs and there'll be fewer SNP MPs after the election. But they have to get away from this because that was their big shortcoming the last time. They got carried away with the whole Labour hegemony in Scotland and thought that nobody could ever challenge them and nobody would ever challenge them. So they became lazy and they took Scottish votes for granted. So the Labour Party needs to accept that they are not the only voice in Scotland. There are other voices in Scotland. And I don't want to see them make the same mistake again.
But Christine, if we're talking about the sort of the problem of legacy for all of the various parties, for people of my generation, the student fee increase that happened under the Lib Dem Tory coalition and the decision that Nick Clegg made to join the coalition and prop up the Cameron government that started off these 14 years of Tory rule is a kind of broken promise and a break in trust that a lot of my generation are going to find very, very difficult to shift in their mind and with their outlook towards the Liberal Democrats. Why should people my age trust the Liberal Democrats now in 2024 after what happened in 2010?
We're in a very, very different situation now. And I think if you look at 2015 and you look at the government before 2015 and you look after 2015 and the policies in both periods, you'll see that when you had the Liberal Democrats, you in government with the Tories, and believe me, it was a battle every day, you had a very different approach. You didn't have the same sort of chaos. You had 5 years of stability.
We had 5 years of stability, but also an introduction of austerity economics that has kind of ravaged our public sector and is a huge factor in why it's difficult to see a GP now.
It wouldn't have mattered who was in government then. We would have had to have that sort of situation. Remember, when we went into the general election in 2010, the country was in a mess financially.
I would push back very, very strongly on that, Christine. I don't think
austerity... You should read Liam Byrne's note. Liam Byrne's note in the Treasury that there was no money left.
Well, I mean, I think that's at best a very poorly phrased and timed joke that's been blown out of proportion. I don't think austerity was an economic inevitability. I think it was a political decision that's been repackaged and resold as an economic necessity. I would very strongly push back that was necessary.
Where we were in 2010 as a country demanded that we had a government and we had a hung parliament. The Labour Party couldn't make up the numbers. It wouldn't have worked. So we had the choice of either letting the country disintegrate almost economically or support a government for 5 years. And we did that. Now, did we make mistakes? Yes, absolutely. Have we learned from them? Yes, absolutely. And I think you'll find that there are a lot of us who were badly burned by that experience emotionally and politically. We felt that there were a lot of things that we weren't comfortable with. But at the same time, we felt that what we had to do was put the country first. That we knew it wasn't the best thing for the party, but we felt that we had to accept that it was the best thing for the country.
I think some of the anxieties around the Liberal Democrats, following up from what Nish said, and of course, I was personally affected by that student fee betrayal, so I remain very salty about it. But I think there's a question of who are the Liberal Democrats? What do they believe in? What are their values? Are they a left of centre party? Do they believe in public spending? Like, what is the vision of the Liberal Democrats?
What we want to see is a fairer society. We are mostly left of centre. We believe in a free market economy, but we want a fair society. And we want a fair deal for people. And to do that, you need an economy which is working. So you get the economy working, but you don't do that. I would say the Tories do that in order to create wealth. For me, as a Liberal Democrat, what I want to do is have a strong economy to create opportunities for everybody, to create equality.
Christine, thank you so much for joining us on PodSafe the UK.
Thanks, Christine.
So, Liz Bates is back in the studio. How was that for you, Liz?
I thought it was interesting, actually, the start of the interview when you said to her, you were really trying to get out what are the defining things about the Liberal Democrats that should make people want to go and actively vote for them rather than the other two big parties at this general election. And she basically said, look, in especially Conservative seats, we're the alternative. And I think that's quite obviously the position that they're taking. And then she went on to list things like, and we really care about health and education and the economy, pretty general stuff. Exactly. So I don't know if we really got to the into the kind of nooks and crannies of what really kind of distinguishes the Lib Dems. One of the things about them is they are really good at campaigning. And I think they know that in this election, there are a lot of people, especially in a lot of Conservative seats, that have had enough with the Tories, and that is where their vote is going. And the Lib Dems are standing there going, okay, we're here and we are ready to accept that vote.
And listen, in a broken electoral system, the first past the post system that we have in this country, I don't think there's nothing wrong necessarily with just being very open about tactical voting being a legitimate thing to do, I guess. But I wanted to ask you a bit more about Scotland and its significance in the election.
Well, because it's a real game changer for the Labour Party. I mean, the SNP have had an absolute, they have dominated Scottish politics for such a long time under Alex Salmond, first of all, and then Nicola Sturgeon kind of consolidated that dominance and the issue of independence. And this is the first election that we're looking at where that could all swing in a different direction. And it's a really important amount of votes for the Labour Party. I mean, they could gain 40 seats and get back into a really good position in Scotland. So I think, the dynamics there are really interesting. Independence is still a really important issue for people. I think this could be the election where they decide to park it and say, okay, the prospect of a Labour government for a lot of Labour voters in Scotland is enough. to take them in a different direction. But whether that issue of independence gets resolved and whether Labour can hold on to those votes, I think is a question for the longer term.
Do you think people are willing to park the conversation about independence partly because they just want the Tories out of office, but also partly because the current situation that the SNP finds itself in, with Humza Yousaf electing to leave, but it's sort of being forced out because of the sort of collapse of that coalition and the chaos caused by the investigation into the SNP's finances, mean that even Scottish voters, and we'd obviously be really interested to hear from our Scottish listeners about whether this rings true to you at all, whether partly it's an issue of parking independence while the SNP sorts its shit out, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those things are right. So I think there's always been an issue for Scottish voters, I think, during long periods of Conservative government, which is they feel thoroughly disenfranchised, and the SNP really taps into that kind of disillusionment with Westminster. But I think now that there's a prospect of, and this has happened as well, during after 97, now that there's a prospect of a Labour government and Scotland becoming potentially a Labour stronghold once again, that might be enough of a draw to make people feel like, okay, finally, a bit of engagement with Westminster. We will feel like we are connected once again to the kind of politics of the UK, and I think that could be a draw.
At the time of recording on Wednesday morning, Diane Abbott has said that she's been banned from standing for Labour at the next election. And she has had the Labour whip restored, she says, and is now a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party. But she says, and she's told to the BBC that although the whip has been restored, I am banned from standing as a Labour candidate. Keir Starmer has handled this situation appallingly because there were continuously reports that the investigation into her was ongoing. It subsequently transpired and leaked to the Times that investigation had concluded several months ago. I think he's handled this incredibly poorly, and it's incredibly disrespectful treatment of a hugely historic figure for ethnic minorities and people of colour in this country.
It's gone on for such a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the original comments were 2 years ago, and it was about a small paragraph, a piece of writing that you could read in about sort of a minute.
Yeah. Also, to be fair, Diane Abbott did apologise for and acknowledge that wrongdoing had been taking place and agreed to participate in the full Labour Party process with it. So it wasn't even an issue that she was necessarily pushing back on those remarks, really. So again, it seems unfathomable that it should have taken this long.
Well, they've obviously just kicked it into the long grass and just thought if we leave it, then, it'll kind of sort itself out. I don't really understand why they've let it go on for this long, but it's still going on now. And I've sort of seen this in my peripheral vision as well, because I work with, a lot of black female journalists, and I see they get a tiny little bit of the kind of abuse that Diane Abbott gets. I honestly don't know how she goes on in public life. I really don't. Like, the abuse that they get and that obviously she gets on a daily basis is utterly, it's horrifying. It's so disgusting. And I think it's amazing that she's carried on this long.
When a prominent Indian judge died at a wedding in Nagpur, India, of a heart attack in December 2014, his passing barely made the news. But when his niece approached a journalist 2 years later, she shared a different narrative, that the circumstances around Judge Bridge Gopal lawyer had made his family doubt the official story.
Sound interesting? Tune into Killing Justice, the newest limited series from Crooked Media and The Branch. Hosted by Ravi Gupta, Killing Justice follows the reporting and legal fallout from this tip, examining the conflicting evidence to answer how one man's death became a magnet for the increasingly polarised politics in India and what this means for the future of the world's largest democracy.
Subscribe to hear the first 2 episodes of Killing Justice, available on Apple and Spotify. New episodes every Monday. For ad-free access to episodes, join Friends of the Pod, Crooked's subscription community at crooked.com/friends. Okay, it's election season, and particularly in this election season, the WTF moments, I don't know why I've censored myself there, given that we've said fuck about 4 times this podcast. The WTF moments are coming thick and fast, so we thought we'd collate them for you in one handy place. Let's start with the unflushable turd of British politics, Nigel Farage, who was out campaigning for reform, even though he claimed that he wasn't running because of his commitments with Donald Trump. He's been out on the stump. He gave an interview to Sky News. He immediately launched into populist rhetoric. He gave a speech this week where he said, how can it be possible that I'm both anti-Semitic and Islamophobic? He's claimed that the most of the problems in the UK boil down to immigration. He said that there are examples of Muslims who are not integrating into UK cultural life. What I would say is, please, TV producers, people who run news programmes, stop booking this fucking man. He has said specifically he does not want to be involved in the UK election because he's going to do grassroots campaigning for America. He's America's problem now. Don't send him back, America. Don't you fucking Piers Morgan him. He's your problem now. Keep him. I swear to God, if you James Corden him, I will lose my goddamn mind. I don't book him. He's not relevant to this election. Stop it. Why do people keep booking this motherfucker? Like, it's beyond me.
I would just like to say, I've never booked him just because I'm scared of you. And I've never done that.
But the thing is that, like, you know, I agree, let's not book him. He's already said he wants nothing to do with UK politics. He's not even standing for the election. Why are we booking him? As much as we say he's not interested, he is, isn't he? He's obsessed.
He's obsessed. Everyone's obsessed. He's a gonorrhea of British politics. Just incurable. We just have persistent flare-ups.
I do love the idea that he keeps calling Rishi Sunak a socialist, though. That does make me laugh, doesn't it? Also this week, as Sunak's policy for national service was going down like a lead balloon, he tried to claw it back with younger voters by making his first ever TikTok. I think we can all agree that he made it worse.
Hi TikTok, sorry to be breaking into your usual politics-free feed, but I'm making a big announcement today and I've been told that a lot of you already have some views on it. So, first thing, no, I'm not sending everyone off to join the army. What I am doing is proposing a bold new model of national service for 18-year-olds.
I prepare very thoroughly for these podcasts. Occasionally I like to leave room for me to be surprised by clips, so I haven't seen them. So I actually hadn't seen that clip.
And you're winded.
I'm in some silence. I feel physically unwell.
I mean, honestly,
I genuinely, I haven't seen an Asian man look that uncomfortable since my first sexual experience.
Nish, he dropped that over the bank holiday weekend, famously the party bank holiday weekend, where you wake up the next day with terrible anxiety. And I just saw that in my most fragile state. I was like, this is a hate crime, man. I shouldn't have to see this. I feel sick.
His face just coming out, like his face just hurtling hundreds of them towards my face. Why?
So Labour have fired back. It's quite spicy what they're doing on their TikTok at the moment.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
That was Lord Farquaad addressing his people from the 2001 film Shrek. And I think we can all agree, if you want to engage Gen Z, we know the route, Shrek.
I mean, Labour's TikTok at the moment is genuinely quite funny. I don't know who's running their social media, but they are obviously a big fan of the love of Huns. That's very clear.
Or maybe they've just been on TikTok before.
Is this going to be a meme-based election, Liz?
I think so. It's difficult for me to talk about because I don't even have TikTok on my phone. That's how old I am and disengaged from the youth of today.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, they can all do national service for all I care.
Liz, is there anything that specifically caught your eye as being particularly WTF?
Yeah, there is. I mean, so there's one particular story that I think is potentially the best one of the election so far. I don't know much about Pelotons, but Rishi Sunak has a Peloton. Apparently, you can see now, it's like publicly available, your kind of record on your Peloton. So like how many runs you've done, how many cycles you've done, whatever. So apparently he said in an interview that he like gets up at 6 a.m. and does like a long bike ride every morning or a long run or something. And someone found his Peloton record. And actually He doesn't do that. He just says that he does that. It says here, Rishi Sunak hardly uses the treadmill or the bike just 34 times since he joined, and none of those workouts have been before 8 a.m, preferring instead to exercise just before a leisurely 9 a.m.
This is the most
The best thing, though, is the only Peloton workout he's done since calling the election, a 5-kilometre scenic run along the Californian coast at Big Sur. So he called the election and then went on his Peloton so that he could run off into the Californian sunset. So I think that maybe gives us a bit of a clue on the question of whether he's planning to stay in the UK if he loses the election. The other thing that I really loved about that is like, that for me is one of the most relatable things that Rishi Sunak has ever done.
Absolutely, for sure.
Just been like, you know, when people say to you that you don't really know that well, oh, do you do any exercise? And you're like, yeah, yoga. But you don't do yoga. You just like once did yoga. On a holiday.
He's got all his clothes hanging on the Peloton. He uses that as the chair that you keep in your room that just gathers stuff.
He's like eating takeaways, then falling asleep, then waking up, then eating the takeaway again.
That is the most relatable he'll ever be, though. I also have a WTF moment that is living in my mind rent-free, and it is that Sir Ian Duncan Smith, the former Tory leader and hardline campaigner for Brexit, has announced a unusual campaigning event. He is hosting, I can't believe I'm saying this, a menopause awareness event on Thursday, the 20th of June at Woodford Green Rugby Club. The free event with light refreshments promises to offer practical advice to support those going through menopause, a worthy cause. I think we can all agree. I mean, I'm not sure I would like to talk about any aspect of my hormones, fertility, bodily changes with Ian Duncan Smith. Me personally? I mean, how about you, Liz?
If I ever experience vaginal dryness, so Ian Duncan Smith is not the person that I'm going to call.
Well, he'll be the cause. He'll experience it just as he walks past. You're like, oh, that's it, gone.
The thing that I love about this story is I kind of have this image in my mind of someone telling Ian Duncan Smith about menopause and him being like, what the fuck? This is awful. People need to know about this.
You're fine. Again, that's relatable. Anyway, so listen, that's the show. Thank you for joining us, Liz. And thank you,
Thank you for
Nick.
having me.
I'm so sorry. I'm just reeling from Ian Duncan Smith as a principal cause of vaginal dryness. I'm still, you're going to have to wind up the show without me.
So if you have any news from your own backyard or any other comments you want to share or topics you want us to look into, email us. If you don't know the address by now, it's psuk@reducedlistening.co.uk. We love hearing your voices, so if you're feeling brave and want to ask us a question, send us a voice note on WhatsApp. Our number is 07494 933 444. Internationally, that's +44 7494 933 444.
We want to hear all your thoughts about this election and which politicians give you vaginal dryness.
Don't forget to follow @PodSaveTheUK on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. You can also find us on YouTube for access to full episodes, and you can drop us a review if you like. We would love that. And this is your cue for vaginal dryness.
What? Drop us a review if we cause you the opposite of vaginal dryness.
It doesn't make sense, actually. That was not good. It doesn't matter. It's provocative. It doesn't matter.
Pod Save the UK is a reduced listening production for Crooked Media.
Thanks to senior producer James Tyndale, as well as digital producer and video editor Nada Smilinic.
Our theme music is by Vasilis Fotopoulos.
Thanks to our engineer Alex Bennett.
The executive producers are Anishka Sharma, Dan Jackson and Madeline Herringer, with additional support from Ari Schwartz.
And remember to hit subscribe for new shows on Thursdays on Amazon, Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts.
And Vaginal Dryness was provided by Ian Duncan Smith.
Fucking hell!